A man over 60, his shoulders bent with the weight of years, paused before the automatic glass doors. They slid open, as if splitting two worlds apart. Outside, dust and wind. Inside, the scent of sandalwood and marble floors polished so bright they reflected the faint cracks in his worn-out shoes. His shirt, faded from countless washes, cuffs frayed, yet in his eyes flickered a gentle light. The fragile hope of someone who still believed honest labor had a place in the world. At the reception desk, a head lifted. Eyes swept across his silver hair, the crooked button, the worn-down heels. A second of silence, then the manager's voice dropped like a heavy stone. "You? Think you belong here?" No need to raise his tone. The way he pressed on the word belong chilled the entire lobby. A few young staff chuckled. Sharp, dry laughter, like a blade clinking against crystal glass. A passing guest turned casually, his look dismissive, as if brushing dust from his sleeve. The old man's hand froze on his bag strap. Veins stood out on his knuckles. He swallowed hard, as if forcing down a hot stone. Humiliation didn't roar. It crept in, thick as brine fog, choking his throat. Yet he bowed his head. "I only asked for a cleaning job. I can do it." No one knew that beneath that faded shirt beat the heart of the man who had built this empire. No one remembered that before there were marble staircases and glittering chandeliers, there was once a young boy standing in a storeroom corner, learning how to wring a rag dry without leaving streaks on wood. That boy, after decades, became the owner. And today the owner returned, not to be honored, but to see if the promise, "We are a family," still breathed or had already died. The answer came too quickly. "Please step aside. Don't block the way." The manager tilted his head, his polite smile wrapped around coldness. The old man shifted, the chill of the stone floor seeping through his thin soles, making his feet tremble slightly. He glanced at the plaque on the right wall. Core values, respect, professionalism, compassion, golden letters on a dark blue background. The spotlight made the words shimmer, yet right beneath it, a young staffer whispered to his friend, "Told you, people like that only fit cheap motels." They laughed crystal clear. He didn't respond. He breathed steady and deep, the way he used to breathe amid the sting of chlorine. On the oak table in the lobby lay a folded brochure. "Luxury is the feeling of being valued." He read it silently, folded it back, placed it down. Being valued, two short words yet heavy as a stone hidden in the palm. At that moment, had you stood close, you would have seen three things happen faster than a blink. A judging glance, a belittling remark, and an excluding decision. Three small acts, yet enough to sketch the genetic code of a culture. People often think culture is the slogans on walls, the workshops, the service standards. But real culture reveals itself in the first 10 seconds when a not-like-us person walks through the door. The old man took a few more steps inside. His footsteps merged with the piano's melody. A guest dropped a napkin. He bent down, picked it up, offered it with both hands, eyes steady, voice gentle. "Ma'am." She froze for a second, took it, then turned away as though receiving it from an invisible machine. Her polite smile never reached her eyes. The first slap had landed, not by hand, but by neglect. Not with violence, but with dismissal. Not through shouting, but by the right to be unseen. That is the cruelest way to deny someone's humanity. He straightened his back a little more. Having once fallen asleep with the smell of bleach on his pillow, he knew. The shiniest places are often where the dust hides deepest. "I can do the work," he repeated, this time to himself. No one answered. Only the pendulum clock in the corner ticked on, silently counting. Then a subtle shift. At the far end of the desk, a young intern glanced over, quickly lowered her eyes as though afraid of being caught seeing. Among all the glances that slid past, there was still one confused, hesitant look. Just a flicker, but enough for him to anchor a shred of faith. In a sea of coldness, sometimes all it takes is one quiet soul to keep warmth alive. You might ask, is such a small scene even worth telling? It is, because every moral collapse begins with the insignificant details. A crooked smile, a half sentence, a person pushed out of sight. Today it was an old man asking for work. Tomorrow it could be you, when you no longer fit the mold someone else has set. And if you are a leader and happen to hear this story, try a 10-minute test for your own organization. Walk into the lobby in the plainest clothes you own. Observe three things. The eyes, how long until there's a genuine look? The words, what terms are used for a stranger? The decisions, who has the power to push whom aside? Record honestly, do not excuse, do not edit the reasons. Luxury does not begin with marble. It begins with how we treat worn-out shoes. And family, if it still means family, must be a place where even the one standing at the threshold is called by name, not by label. That was the opening moment. A dry laugh, a cold glance, a man clutching his bag strap to stop his hand from trembling. The story is far from over. But right at the doorway, truth had already introduced itself. All that glittering light was not warm enough if dignity was left outside in the cold. That night, after stepping out of the dazzling lobby, the old man sat alone in a dark corner near the parking lot. The smell of sea breeze mingled with the stale smoke dropped by a guest who had just left. He looked down at his calloused hands, the old cracks still etched clear. Those wounds weren't accidents. They were the marks of a lifetime of labor. Few knew that before becoming the owner of a gold-trimmed resort chain, he had once been an 18-year-old in a uniform that reeked of bleach, clutching a mop for corridors that seemed to stretch forever. His back stooped, his hands blistered from detergent, his shoes soaked by the end of every shift. In those days, no one asked his name. No one cared what he ate to fill his stomach. He existed like a shadow, there only to wipe the dust beneath other people's feet. Yet it was in those days of deepest disregard that he learned his greatest lesson. Wages may be small, but dignity is priceless. Each coin earned with sweat and aching bones might exhaust the body, but self-respect still stands upright. That belief carried him step by step, from cleaner to clerk, from clerk to manager, and at last to the founder of a hospitality empire. People assumed success had scrubbed away a humble past, but he never forgot. On the contrary, he kept that memory like a small lamp to light the road. So even in the highest chair, he ate simply, walked without bodyguards, and spoke plainly like an ordinary worker. That is why his decision to disguise himself as a poor old man seeking a job was no prank. It was a test of conscience. He wanted to know, after so many years of expansion, after so many promises hung on walls, did the family he once dreamed of still live within these marble halls? Or had it died? Did the people who served here still see one another as human beings? Or had they become mere cogs in a cold machine? And as you saw in the previous part, the answer revealed itself right at the threshold. The disdain and the snickers laid it bare. The slogans had become only golden letters on stone. In substance, the family culture he had built was fracturing, and honest workers were being turned away by the very house that should have sheltered them. A question began to take shape in him. If his own past was once a broom in hand, why are those holding brooms today treated worse than that boy ever was? And if this company truly is a family, who cut the thread that binds person to person? Listeners by now also see, success is not measured by the number of gilded rooms or the stock price, but by how the weakest are treated within the system. An organization is truly strong only when its lowest rung members still feel seen and valued. In his first quiet days of work, the old man began to notice each face, each story hidden beneath the uniform. And there he saw three lives, like mirrors reflecting a shared pain. The single mother. Before dawn breaks, she pushes a cart of white linens down endless halls. By noon, her back aches, her hands smell of detergent, her blouse drenched in sweat. At home, a 12-year-old daughter waits, clutching a notebook filled with sketches and the dream of becoming a nurse. But school fees pile up like mountains. Debt letters press against her chest like stones. By day, she smiles so her child won't worry. By night, she weeps in the bathroom, unseen. Her health drains away, but she dares not take a single day off. For one lost shift means an empty meal and a roof at risk of collapse. The veteran worker of 20 years. He knows the creak of every door, remembers the slight sway of the grand chandelier. 20 years of loyalty, yet his name never once appeared on the recognition board. His salary has stood still, while his shifts were cut to make room for younger, more dynamic hires. The words he whispered to the disguised old man cut deep. Here, only flatterers survive. The rest let them rot. The once steady eyes are now clouded with weary haze. The sorrow of a lifetime's devotion met with silence. The young intern. On his first day, his eyes glowed bright, his hand clutching a notebook filled with sketches of room designs, dreaming of learning the craft for real. But day after day, he received only orders. Carry trays, collect trash, wipe spills. When he asked how to set a table, the manager brushed him off. Don't ask, just do. The vivid dream dulled under fluorescent lights, his smile frayed like a thread in the wind. And yet in his eyes lingered a faint spark, a fragile hope that one day someone might truly see him. 3 lives, 3 ages, 3 struggles, but the same denominator. Being forgotten in the very place they serve. The mother sacrifices her body to nourish her child's dream. The veteran offers 20 years only to receive silence. The youth surrenders his springtime to watch his dream notebook gather dust. The old man looked on in silence, a painful question echoing within. Was this resort still the home he had once promised, or had it become a machine that grinds people down? And for the listener, these stories are not foreign. Somewhere we've all seen ourselves in those cracked hands, those weary eyes, those fading dreams. This is not just the tale of a resort, it is a mirror of every workplace, where dignity is forgotten if no one dares to remind it. The resort's canteen should have been a place of rest, a corner to loosen one's shoulders after hours of toil. But that day, when the old man sat in the shadows, a tray of hot rice in hand, he sensed a different air, heavy, thick, piercing like needles. At a distant table, a group of young staff huddled close, their laughter sharp, splitting the room. One leaned in, his voice like a blade. Here, only those who flatter up and step down survive. Hard work is useless. Snickers followed, thin and bitter, like coins clinking in an empty box. Another voice sneered, being smart means knowing how to play the game, not how to work. The laughter spread like toxic smoke, curling into every corner. Across the room, a housekeeper with red, cracked hands stirred her watery soup without lifting it to her lips. Nearby, the bellboy lowered his eyes, staring at the floor, too afraid to react. Not one person spoke against them. The silence of the diligent was itself a mute confession. They knew those cruel words were true, and that resisting would only bring more pain. The old man gripped his spoon, trembling not from age but from anguish. Each burst of laughter struck like a hammer, cracking the glossy facade to reveal the rotten frame within. In a place once called a second family, a darker law now ruled. The honest would be trampled, the cunning climbed on others' backs to rise. This was not merely the flaw of individuals, it was a system normalized. Here, deceit was considered cleverness, flattery a skill, and honesty a liability for elimination. The canteen grew stifling. The mingled smell of food and clinking spoons filled the air. But no meal tasted right, because what they swallowed was not just rice, it was resentment, the bitter truth that decent labor no longer had value here. For listeners, that scene tolls a warning. Toxic culture doesn't start in grand halls or shiny policies. It starts at the dining table. When cruelty and mockery are met with approving laughter, the silence of the many becomes complicity. The old man sat there, eyes scanning the bowed heads of the housekeeper, the calloused hands of the janitor, the hunched shoulders of the young intern. All were silent, and in that moment he understood. This was no longer a resting place for workers, but a theater where people learned to survive by bowing. From the suffocating canteen, the old man was thrown into a spiral of endless trials. The tasks handed to him were never meant as training, but as humiliation. A mop, a bucket of water, and a cold remark tossed his way. Figure it out yourself. No guidance. No one bothered to show him how. He began his shift like a ghost, invisible to those around him. Then came the VIP cleaning duty. As the door swung open, the stench of chemicals punched his lungs. No gloves, no mask, only his aged hands battling fumes that clawed at his chest. He coughed harshly, bent low, yet kept scrubbing every stain. From the doorway, a laugh cut in. At that age, how can he keep up? He didn't reply, only braced himself with silence, the last shield he had left. The next afternoon in the lavish lobby, a tray slipped from his hands, glass shattering loud and sharp. Dozens of eyes turned. The manager barked, voice booming off the marble walls. "Useless old man, you don't deserve to stand here." The words echoed through the hall, reaching even guests in polished suits. Some chuckled, others shook their heads. No one stepped forward. The old man crouched, picking shards with bare hands. A sliver of glass cut deep, blood staining the gleaming floor. But still he picked, as though gathering fragments of his crushed dignity. That evening in the kitchen, the manager leaned close, hissing, "With one word from me, you won't find work in any resort again." The threat was sharper than a knife, not about the job, but his very existence. Before he could recover, another blow arrived. A VIP guest waited for service. The old man stood ready with a tray, but the manager blocked him, snapping, "Let them wait, doesn't matter." When the guest grew angry, the manager pointed at him. "It's his fault. Too slow." The guest's glare pierced him. He hadn't spoken a word before guilt was strapped to his back. And for the long-serving staff, the cruelty was quieter, but no less brutal. On the shift roster, the single mother's name was crossed out. She collapsed in tears. "If I lose this shift, I can't pay rent." Her plea was simple but heavy as stone. The manager's reply was ice. "The young are faster, you're dismissed." That night in the shadows, the old man sat, his chest tight. He remembered himself in years past. Trembling hands scolded as too slow, dreams forced into silence beneath barking orders. History was repeating itself. The only difference was that once he had dreamed of a place where fairness might prevail. The listener might ask, why don't they fight back? But in a workplace where fear has hardened into an unspoken law, silence becomes the only means of survival. And that silence feeds the bullies, making cruelty routine. Amid the heavy days filled with scolding and cold stares, a moment suddenly arrived like a drop of fresh water in a desert. It was midday, after long hours of the old man hunched over mops and rags, unable to swallow a single bite. He sat in the corner of the kitchen, stomach twisting with hunger, but his hands were empty. Before him lay only a scratched wooden table. No meal, no tray. Then a small figure appeared. A thin young worker placed before him a simple lunchbox. Inside was plain rice, some vegetables, and a small piece of meat. The boy's voice was soft, warm as a candle. "Eat, uncle. I know you haven't had anything yet." The old man looked up, stunned. His throat tightened. All the words he wanted to say turned into a single trembling phrase. "Thank you." His eyes grew wet, not from exhaustion, but from surprise that in such a cold place, a hand of kindness could still reach out. That lunchbox, ordinary to anyone else, was a banquet of compassion to him. Amid mockery and silent complicity, there was still a heart untainted. A small gesture, yet strong enough to shake the thick walls of despair. The boy smiled shyly, adding, "Not everyone here is bad. It's just, most are too afraid to speak." The words affirmed one truth. Humanity hadn't vanished. It was only buried. For the listener, this moment is a reminder. Change doesn't always come from grand acts. Sometimes a lunchbox, a glance, a whispered word is enough to keep a person from collapsing. In a toxic place, even the smallest fragments of kindness can bear the weight of an unjust world. As the old man quietly ate, each grain of rice was no longer just food, but a reminder. If cruelty spreads through mocking laughter, then kindness can spread through silent empathy. And sometimes a single seed of goodness is enough to revive a garden thought long dead. That night, the old man returned to his small rented room, its walls cracked, a yellow bulb casting a sickly glow. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands resting on his knees, calloused, bleeding. Fingers that had once signed contracts, once turned the key to open the resort's first doors, now trembled after a day of being cursed like trash. Memory dragged him backward. In his youth, he too had knelt among chemical fumes, his back aching beneath the stomping boots of superiors. He once believed that by building a paradise of hospitality, such lives would disappear. But no, they had returned, replayed inside the very palace he had built, beneath chandeliers glittering with the word luxury. He buried his face in his hands, breath heavy as if carrying a boulder. Daytime memories came flooding back. Shattered glass, blood dripping on marble, the mocking laughter of co-workers, the shout of, "Useless old man!" The housekeeper's shift crossed out, the intern hiding his dream notebook. Each scene was a blade, cutting into his pride. A single tear slipped down, not only for himself, but for all those forgotten in the dark corners. He knew, if he stayed silent any longer, the truth would be buried under red carpets, and the cries of the workers would continue to be drowned behind bathroom doors. He raised his head. His weary eyes now glimmered like embers, catching wind. His shoulders still bent, but in that posture, a new strength was forming. He whispered two words, quiet yet more commanding than any order. "Enough." Heard the sound was small, yet the room seemed to echo. It was not a word for him alone, but a vow for all who had been suffocated by silence. From that moment, he was no longer a poor old man begging for work. He was a mountain of patience, ready for the earthquake. The night stretched on, but the darkness no longer held loneliness. It carried a promise. Tomorrow, truth would step into the light. The next morning, an urgent message echoed through the resort. "All staff, report to the Grand Hall immediately." Murmurs broke out like a hive disturbed. Some sighed, thinking it was just another pointless briefing. Others smirked. Probably the same old performance. The manager, the one who had strutted with pride, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a smug grin curling his lips. The doors opened. The old man entered, still in his faded uniform, worn-down shoes, moving at a slow pace. At first, the hall erupted with whispers, a few mocking laughs. "Did this old guy get lost? This is a staff meeting." Others turned away, shaking their heads, but he didn't waver. Each step echoed differently, as if the weight of the air shifted with him. He walked straight to the center of the hall, stopped and lifted his head. The usual stoop in his back disappeared. His eyes shone. His voice, raspy yet firm, rang out. "I am the CEO of this resort." The words struck like lightning. Silence fell. The smirk on the manager's face froze, color draining from his skin. Those who had laughed choked on their own disbelief. A few mouths hung open. Others whispered, "No, it can't be." Chairs scraped, hearts pounded. The old man raised his hand, pulled away the wig and the layers of makeup. Beneath them emerged a face everyone knew. The face from magazine covers, from investor meetings, from the portrait hanging in the boardroom. Every gaze turned toward him. Many dropped their eyes, cheeks burning with shame. No one dared to chuckle now. He stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over each face. The mockers, the silent bystanders, the indifferent witnesses. The hall was heavy with silence, but no longer the silence of contempt. It was the silence of truth pressing down. He stopped, his voice low yet resonant, each word falling like stone onto marble. "I have heard, I have seen, and today everything hidden in the dark will be brought into the light." The air in the hall thickened. Everyone held their breath, eyes locked on the man who had just shed the mask of a useless old worker. His voice rose, no longer weak but steady, deliberate, each word striking like a hammer. "I remember every word spoken to me." He paused, his gaze fixed squarely on the manager. Then, before hundreds of witnesses, he repeated each phrase verbatim, sharp as a blade. "Useless old man. No one cares if you stay. At your age, better off dead." Each word dropped, and the room sank deeper into silence. The snickers of days past now turned into knives pointed back at the very mouths that had uttered them. Eyes lowered, shame flushed across faces. The manager's skin turned pale, his lips twitching for excuses that never formed. His throat locked tight, sweat running down his temples. All the arrogance he once wore had vanished, stripped away, leaving only fear, raw and trembling, before the crowd. The old man didn't shout. He didn't need to. His calm made the repeated words cut even deeper, a living indictment. And when the silence grew so tense that even heartbeats seemed loud, he lowered his voice, yet it struck harder than any yell. That was not a mistake. That was cruelty. And here, cruelty has no place. He raised his finger, pointed straight at the manager. His next words cracked like thunder. "You! Leave this place, now!" The hall erupted. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling, rolling like a storm, drowning the last flicker of the tyrant's pride. The manager staggered back, his steps unsteady, face drained of all color. No one defended him. No one stood by his side. He slunk out, his figure shrinking beneath the roar of clapping hands. And in that applause, years of fear shattered. Hearts long silenced now burst with release. For the first time, justice did not whisper. It stood, visible, undeniable before their eyes. The thunder of applause slowly faded, giving way to a waiting silence. All eyes turned toward him, no longer with scorn, but with a tense, breathless anticipation. He drew a deep breath, his voice low but full of gravity. Justice is not only about punishment, justice must restore. He turned toward the veteran worker of 20 years, hair streaked with gray, shoulders bent from a lifetime of being overlooked. His tone softened, deliberate. 20 years, and never once was your name spoken. From today, your salary will rise to match the journey you've carried. Loyalty must be recognized. The man trembled, lips quivering without words. Tears held back for years fell freely, not of sorrow, but of the relief of finally being seen. Then he faced the single mother, her eyes still swollen from nights of silent tears. His voice grew tender. You have given your health to keep your child's dream alive. That dream will not die. I grant your daughter a full scholarship. She will return to school, and she will become the nurse she longs to be. The woman broke down in sobs, no longer muffled, but loud, unrestrained. The sound of release. Around her heads bowed, some wept openly. At last, his gaze found the young intern, the boy who had hidden his dream-filled notebook as though it were a shame. The old man gave a firm nod. From this day forward, you will be trained properly, not just fetching and cleaning, but learning the craft as you wished. Dreams must be nurtured, not smothered. The boy's eyes lit up, his trembling smile breaking wide across his sweat-damp face. In that moment, a withering dream bloomed again. The hall held still, then applause surged once more. But this time, it wasn't just for punishment delivered, it was for hope reborn. He lifted his hand. The clapping ceased. His voice rang out, slow, steady, carved into the air like words into stone. Jobs may be lost, but dignity must never be trampled. From today, the first standard here will not be luxury. It will not be profit. The first standard will be respect. Tears welled in many eyes. The young lowered their heads in regret. The older ones straightened their backs, taller than before. In that room, fear dissolved, replaced by a collective vow.